Today we're going to be taking a look at the Fosi Audio V3 Monos. A lot of people have reviewed this in the past, usually in 2-channel setups, but today I want to see how it performs in a home theater situation with 6 of them installed. Alright, so why would I want to do something like this when you can get an 11-channel monolith amplifier, when you can get something from OSD in 3, 5, or 7 channels at a very reasonable price? So the primary reason I'm doing it is because I can, and I was just curious to see if it would work. I've used Class D amps for a long time, going back to something like the SMSL SA30 and SA50. Those are some of the first ones that I used, and I thought that they were very good for what they were at that time. Now there are new technologies that give them more power and better sound quality, and I want to see how this actually works in a real world situation. Now the reason why this works is because there are some aspects of these V3 mono amplifiers that would be suitable in a home theater situation. So for example, I am using a Tone Winner AT300, which has both RCAs and XLRs. I've found that XLRs may minimize noise, and so these have XLR and TRS inputs. You also don't need the amplifiers running at 100% all the time, so this has an auto standby feature, which I think is handy. They have other amplifiers like the ZA3 that I've used, and they do have a 12-volt trigger, but I've never been able to get those to work. Another reason why I thought this might be interesting is because I discovered that they do have these power strips that enable you to turn things off based on a different device. I'll get into that in a little bit. The pricing starts at $109 if you don't need a power supply. It's $139 if you choose to go with a 48-volt 5-amp one. It goes up to $209 if you go for the 48-volt 10-amp, and $279 for 2 V3 monos, and that comes with a 48-volt 10-amp power supply with a splitter so that you can use it with both amplifiers. So this is using the Texas Instruments TPA3255 chip, which is used in many devices. This is the one with PFFB, so that's post-filter feedback. And what that does is most Class D amps, or inexpensive Class D amps, they have an issue in the high frequencies mostly, where if you connect various speakers with different ohm loads, they may change depending on the resistance of that speaker. Because they're load dependent means that that amplifier may not sound the same depending on which speaker you have. This might not be as much of an issue if you're using EQ, but it's something that I would rather not have in an amplifier. So this PFFB fixes that by using a feedback loop. I don't know exactly how it works, but I've seen various measurements of PFFB, and it does make a difference. This also uses nice components from Japan. You know, nice components are nice to have. I don't know that I can hear any difference, but yeah, I like having them in there. So they claim to be able to provide 240 watts at 4 ohms. And what you need to be able to do that is a large power supply. The power supply here, as you can tell, is very large. Keep in mind that if you do want to go with a smaller power supply, that will limit you to 100 watts at 4 ohms. This does seem to have good measurements from what I've seen on Aaron's Audio Corner and on Audio Science Review. So I'll defer to them when it comes to that stuff. I just don't have the measurement gear, but I'll link to those in the description. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that this does not have a volume knob, whereas the ZA3 did, and that comes in handy if you're using this as a power amplifier because you don't have to worry about whether the knob has been turned. It's just always at full power all the time, of course, depending on what the signal is that you're putting into it. But it's just one less thing to have to worry about. And I should be clear that I don't mean that it is at full power all the time. It's just that all the power is on tap. If you blast it with a full signal, it will give you full power in return. This has the ability to do op-amp rolling, kind of similar to tube rolling, where you can change up the sound signature depending on the op-amp that you use. So I have tried op-amp rolling on a previous amp review a long time ago on a Burson amp, and I can say I did hear a difference. I didn't have the measurement gear to tell you why I heard that difference, but there was a noticeable difference. But it's not something I would focus on just because the amount of difference that one of those op amps makes is very tiny in comparison to, let's say, EQ, which I am really for. If you want to change the sound of your system, EQ seems like the easiest, best way to do it. So I've heard from others that theirs had heat-related issues, and that's something I definitely want to go into, and I definitely will because Fosi did not sponsor this video, but it is sponsored by the Spatial Audio Calibration Toolkit. That's a project that I have with Technodad, and we created a disc that allows you to test your Dolby Atmos system. It's also sponsored by my Magic Bean software, which is intended to find the true target response of the speakers in your room at your listening position. I'll leave a link down below to both. So regarding the heat issues, I talked to a friend who builds his own amplifiers. This guy is kind of my go-to guy when it comes to this electronics. And he said, what do you expect from these little amps? They're putting out a ton of power, and look at the sizes of this thing. Heat is what kills electronics, and with something this small and this powerful, the heat has to go somewhere. So that's all good in theory, but what does that really mean in the real world? So I had 2 of these set up and both were working fine. I just kind of left them on, and I figured the auto standby would kind of keep it cool. Not a hot day, just a normal day. And next day I came and one of them just wasn't working. When I talked to my friend, he talked about quiescent wattage, and he talked about how much power was actually being put out even at idle. And he said that even with the idle wattage, if you were to put your finger on that chip, it would probably burn your finger. So it's not nothing. So that's something I think that you should be aware of, that when people are having these issues, I think that it is a real thing. So what I did was I bought an AC Infinity fan, usually used for AVRs, and I put 2 of them on this just to start. I took some temperature readings of these amplifiers in various situations, and definitely, hands down, these need a fan, and this is obvious because they even sell a fan on their website. Without the fans, they get pretty hot. You know, I don't know what is good and what is bad, but it's almost uncomfortable where I put my hand on top of them and I'm like, I can leave my hand there, but it's like, are these supposed to be this hot? So the idea is that they're supposed to use the whole case as the heatsink, and that's all good, but there's probably not a ton of air in there, and there's not a lot of metal for it to dissipate heat. It's not like a heatsink where it has a lot of surface area. It's just, it doesn't seem to be removing the heat from the chip fast enough. So these still take power even when it's on that auto standby mode. And what I did was I searched on Amazon and found these 2 power strips that are very affordable. And the way that these work is, if something turns on, it'll turn on other devices. So this is perfect. If the pre-pro turns on when it's plugged into this section here, it'll turn on all the other devices that are connected on this side. And keep in mind that you can connect another power strip, just a normal power strip, to the area that is the remote, and you can add more devices that way. You don't have to keep getting the same exact device. All you need is the one function where if something turns on, it turns other things on. And when something turns off, then the other devices turn off as well. So this video is not about these smart switches, but just know that they do have options for low, medium, and high. So depending on the device that you're using, you can change what amount of power draw is required to make the other ones turn on and off. So this does sound like my home theater system, where kind of like a relay system. When I turn on the pre-pro, everything else turns on. It sounds pretty cool. Same thing when I turn it off, everything else turns off, drawing absolutely no power. So with this setup, I feel comfortable in saying that I think that this setup will last because all the things are running nice and cool. And yeah, I think it's a cool setup. It's unfortunate that you have to buy these extra things, but that's what happens when you're using this in this type of environment, a little bit experimental. I still would recommend using some fans if you're using this in a 2-channel setup. I ended up getting a 3-fan version from AC Infinity to accommodate all the amplifiers here. So let's start wrapping it up. As far as sound quality and whether you should buy this, well, they sounded excellent with my Philharmonic BMR speakers here. I don't know what else to tell you. A good amplifier shouldn't add or detract from the sound. When people say that it does, it may be because it doesn't have something like this post-filter feedback. And so, yeah, it may change the sound. So there is such thing as synergy, even though I don't think that there should be necessarily. You know what I mean? So yeah, with excellent speakers, I'm using EQ, so I want the amplifier to do as little as possible so that I can measure the speakers, EQ them properly, and what I get is what I expect to get. Now, I wouldn't recommend that somebody go and do this for a home theater situation just because the dollars per watt is not the best. You're not getting the best deal doing it this way. So not including the AC Infinity fans or the smart power strip that I showed you guys, the Fosi comes out to about $1.15 per watt, whereas this OSD amp here comes out to 67 cents per watt. Now, what is the trade-off? The trade-off is that the other one is huge and heavy, much heavier than this. I'm thinking if you add in all the power supplies, yeah, the other one is definitely still heavier because it actually has 2 huge toroidal transformers in there, and it's a lot. But you don't need fans because it has a large case, has heat sinks in there, so a lot more airflow and just a lot more air and ways to dissipate heat. Let's say if you have an AVR and it's running 9 channels of amplification and you need 11, then I think it might be a good idea to get something like this. What I would do is I would use maybe 2 or 3 to run your main left, center, and right speaker. And then the extra channels that you free up, use those built-in channels from your AVR to run, let's say, your height speakers or whatever it is that you're adding. The reason being is because your left, center, and right are the most important. They're going to produce the most sound, and they probably are the ones that are gonna need the most power, so spend the power on those. If you're using these for a 2-channel setup, I still think that they're pretty cool with fans. Definitely get the fans. I'll make sure to leave a link to all the products in the description here. I think that answers most of the questions that I had, and hopefully the ones that you have. And I do have a recommendation for Fosi, and that is, I wish that they would make some nice 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 channel Class D amps, because Class D is efficient. It's power efficient, right? So to get the amount of power that we need here, it's going to take less power than an equivalent Class AB, or definitely more efficient than a Class A amp. What I think that a lot of people don't realize is, if you're using a sub, if you're not running speakers full range, for example, in a home theater situation, you're probably not using a ton of power, right? You're probably using a lot less than you think. So I think if they came out with some smaller amps that were, let's say, 60 clean watts, I think that a lot of people could make use of that. Something very slim, streamlined, where you can buy a couple of them. I think that would be a great idea specifically for home theater situations. I do have some other amplifiers that I use from Fosi that are 5-channel amplifiers, and I use them in my studio setup, and they work great. It's just that they don't have banana plugs. It's kind of just a cramped space. They have a lot less power. They're a little bit noisier than these. So I think that they have the technology to do that. It's just a matter of them actually doing it. So hopefully they listen. If that's something that you guys would be interested in affordable Class D, 5-channel, 7-channel, 11-channel, 9-channel, I don't know. If that's something you'd be interested in, leave your comment below. If you have any other questions, also leave them below. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos, and watch these other videos up here that are related. And once again, thanks for watching.